Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show, bringing you another really fascinating guest today involved in creating a better tomorrow on some really unique fronts. Today, we have the honor of being joined by Mariah Collins, who is a partner at the Bridgespan Group, which is a United States nonprofit organization. They're located in Boston that ultimately provides management consulting to both nonprofit organizations and philanthropists, where she's involved in leading both the measurement, evaluation, and learning area of expertise, in addition to co-leading their public health area of expertise. And she has extensive experience in working with philanthropists, donor collaboratives, foundations, nonprofits, impact investors, ultimately focused on, she says, making big bets. The Bridgespan Group, as mentioned, is a global nonprofit. Their mission is to make the world more equitable and just, and they have, for a couple decades now, had the ability to advise and collaborate with many of the world's largest most extraordinary social change leaders. And Mariah, has a lot of these groups as her clients. She has philanthropy clients, including the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Stephen Alexandra Cohen Foundation. She also advises private offices like Texas Pacific Group and a variety of other nonprofit clients like the National Council for Mental Well-Being, Nurse Family Partnership, just to name a few. Mariah also has a very long-standing interest in an area that we touch on quite a bit on this show, namely the social determinants of health. And has co-authored numerous reviews on this topic in publications like the Harvard Business Review, the Stanford Social Innovation Review, and we'll be getting into some of these themes as well. Mariah holds a Master's of Science degree from the T.H. Chan Harvard School of Public Health, graduated Phi Beta Kappa and summa cum laude from Brandeis, where she studied health policy, public health, as well as environmental studies. A lot of really interesting themes to get into today. All that being said, Mariah Collins, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today and talk to us for a little while.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's really exciting. It's a set of themes that we have not touched on that much on the show in terms of what you're involved in. But before we get there, I would just really love to start off, as we typically do, by handing you the floor for a little bit just to talk a little bit more about yourself. I was reading a little bit about your thesis, where you were working on childhood obesity in the Boston area. Some very interesting social determinant work there. You had some interesting publications on how the care of children not only is affected by sort of the physician, but sort of the parents' health state preferences. A lot of interesting things you're doing back then. What got you interested in public health to begin with? It's a really interesting story.
It's a great question. I would say one of my own personal North Stars throughout my life has been social justice. It's something that was a big important theme in my family growing up, giving back to the community, finding ways to get involved, being part of community, and also understanding the importance of equity. And that I sit in a very privileged place, for example, as a white woman, and recognizing that there are others that do not have that privileged place in the world. And part of my job is to help others get what they need in life, and breaking down barriers and trying to make the world more equitable, whether that's locally, whether that's globally, is something that just from an early age was a part of who I was and what I was doing. And I took some trips early on in life. I went to South Africa, I went to Romania on these experiential learning trips where I went and volunteered and got to know communities. And I think there's some really great things about service learning trips. I also know there are some criticisms around it, but overall, it really did open my eyes to the world out there and the need to repair the world and to help the world and to do what I can. And so that is in part why I actually ended up at Brandeis, because of its social justice mission and the ability to be really hands-on and involved in the community. And at Brandeis, I took some courses in public health and healthcare and also environmental studies, and it just really struck a chord. And especially as you mentioned around social determinants of health and environmental justice, it felt like that was a place where I just got personal energy and felt like there were actually some clear levers for change that could be addressed and that I personally could address in the work that I did one day in my career. And public health in particular felt like such a wide open space where you can impact the lives of individuals, but you can also impact the lives of populations. And I really appreciated that opportunity to not just help one person, but to help communities and to think broadly and innovatively about solutions for how to drive to better outcomes, especially health equity and health outcomes. So ended up at Harvard School of Public Health after Brandeis, and then really sat at Harvard School of Public Health and thought, what's next? What is the career that I want to start to explore as a part of this thesis of repairing the world and social justice and health equity and environmental justice? And I found the Bridgespan Group, and Bridgespan was really attractive in that it is a generalist firm. We work on a number of different issues so that I could really see the world from these different vantage points. And I was really excited about the opportunity to take the toolkit that I had learned at Brandeis and Harvard School of Public Health and apply that in a number of different sectors, including public health. So have now been at Bridgespan for almost 11 years, which is a very, very long time. And as you said in the intro, have had the opportunity to work with an unbelievable set of organizations and social change leaders and thought leaders, and feel so privileged to have the opportunity to be in conversation and dialogue and find ways to be helpful as these organizations further their own impact goals, which also sync with my own personal theory of change and the ways in which I want to have impact in the world.
Outstanding, really outstanding. And yeah, I mean, I very much look forward to getting into some of these themes and the projects that you're working on at Bridgespan. Before we get there, though, there's one other place I wanted to stop, because I thought, in your journey and towards Bridgespan, I think you actually were at Bridgespan at the time, you published this really fascinating paper in the Stanford Social Innovation Review in 2016, entitled "The Community Cure for Healthcare." And here, you get into the social determinants of health. You talk about sort of this theme of making social needs part of clinical culture, and how some of these larger health systems and maybe clients of yours at the time were beginning to think about investing. And we'll get into impact investing in the theme shortly, but talk a little bit about what you were seeing at the time on this front, because it's very interesting. I'm sitting here in downtown Philadelphia right now, and there's a very interesting social determinant program down the street here at Children's Hospital, something called the Food Pharmacy, where, as you were saying, we have a very bad health and wealth inequality and balance in Philadelphia. We have a very large food desert nearby. And here's an example of one of the largest health systems creating this thing. It's not a traditional pharmacy as you might think of one. They dispense food, healthy foods, to those that don't have access in their communities. And it's a major hospital chain. Talk a little bit about what was going on in 2016 when you wrote this particular paper.
So the example that you gave is actually the exact examples that we were seeing in the world, where there were a set of these really forward-thinking and innovative health centers and health systems that recognized we care about the health of our patients, and we care about the health of our patients beyond the 30 minutes or 15 minutes they are in an office for a sick visit. And understanding that the drivers of health and wellness are so much greater than just access to medical care. To be clear, access to medical care is a critically important part of a person's health and well-being, and there is so much more. the community in which somebody lives, the housing in which they reside, their access to food, access to transportation, to childcare, a safe neighborhood where they feel comfortable walking around and reaching public transportation to get to their jobs, for example. These are factors that actually are scientifically proven to drive health outcomes. Your zip code actually is one of the greatest determinants of health outcomes. Yeah. So we know this, and this is important. And then when you think about what are the different levers that you could actually impact social determinants of health, there's community-based interventions, there's nonprofit organizations that often work on specific issues, and then there's health systems. And what we were seeing is that there were these set of health systems that were taking this social determinants of health approach. They were moving upstream. They were going away from just thinking about healthcare to health and wellness and well-being. And they were taking their own operating budget and creating these programs like the one that you just described, a food pharmacy, which is one of the examples we highlighted in the article, at another health system. And they were investing in that in pursuit of better patient outcomes. And this was a trend we wanted to emphasize to say, look, health systems, you have access to patients. You actually have the reach, the relationships, the connections to the patients for which social determinants of health are most critically important. So you can use your role as an anchor institution and as the relationship holder to actually change health outcomes in a fundamentally different way than how you traditionally think about it. And so the point of the article was really to shine a light on these different examples and really inspire other health systems to move upstream and to create the programs like the one that you just described.
Outstanding. And just for the audience, we will put links to all of Mariah's current reports and previous articles in the bio of the show, because I think they're very important in talking about this theme. So let's get into the Bridgespan Group a little bit, and a little bit of this theme of impact first investing, and again here for the audience, another great report that Mariah and her team has co-authored entitled "Back to the Frontier: Investing that Puts Impact First," that will describe a little bit of probably what Mariah's going to be talking about next. But in this report and other presentations I've watched you give, Mariah, you talk about this continuum of returns. On one hand being, investors that just care about returns. On the other end, philanthropy, where no one's looking for returns, but just doing good. And in the middle, there's these new areas of impact investing that we want to have an impact. And you specifically focus on impact first, because there's some of those impact investors that want financial returns first and then some impact. I'm sorry if I butchered it that much, but take us into this world. And also, if you would touch on the but-for component of impact investing and why that is a sort of a very crucial piece of what you're all about.
Yes, it's a great question. And impact first investing has also come by with another term, which is catalytic capital. And the idea here is that there really is this space, as you described, in between market rate returns and philanthropy, in which there is an opportunity to have impact and invest in organizations and businesses at below market rate return. And that can take a couple of different forms. It may be a low interest loan, for example. It may be investing in a business with an entrepreneur for whom this is their first business. It may be investing in a new market or a new product. And all of this needs to have impact at its core, to be clear. And this whole white space that we call impact first investing is the idea that at the end of the day, as an investor, your goal is to maximize impact, and you may get some returns. You are expected to get some returns. It's not philanthropy where you lose 100% of your investment in pursuit of impact, but you're getting something that is more than negative 100% and is less than market rate returns. And again, to be clear, in some cases, you may actually get market rate returns, but you do not go in with that expectation. Your goal is to maximize impact. And the reason this is such a powerful tool is because there are so many social challenges in the world, so many social challenges, so many environmental challenges, in which there's a whole set of solutions that exist. It's not a one size fits all. We can't fix climate change just with philanthropy. We can't fix climate change just with market rate investments. It's going to take a whole set of different tools across all different ideas and sectors, like housing, for example, electrification, for example. There are so many that I could name there. And impact first investing really fills that middle space and essentially norms and gives permission for investors to take on these riskier investments in pursuit of impact. And just to your point around the but-for test, I think overall the idea of impact investing, to be clear, is that there is both impact and some financial returns. Again, those financial returns can be market rate or they can be concessionary and below market rate. But the idea is that there is some additionality, which is another jargony term, but that there is some value of investors taking the step to invest in these impact businesses, that the market alone would not create the conditions to invest in these businesses, but rather an investor is saying, I believe in this mission. I believe that impact is so critically important, and therefore I want to invest in this. And I think there's, there's a whole range of viewpoints, to be clear, around what additionality means in impact investing. There's different ways to think about additionality. Additionality may mean that you are first dollars in, for example, you're catalyzing other investment. It may also mean that you're being really strategic and creating an own value in ways such as building the business to be more focused on their impact KPIs. So there's different ways to think about that but-for test and additionality. It's not just the idea that new money is going into a space, especially when you think of market rate investments, which are market rate. It's a competitive investing landscape out there.
Wonderful. Okay, this goes perfectly now into the next set of topics. And again, for the audience, another important paper that Mariah's team has authored, which you can find at the Bridgespan site, and we'll put links to how impact investing could ultimately improve health and well-being. And Mariah, in this report, you target three important areas that are very core for our show, and I'd love to go into each of these as wonderful examples of your work, and very timely. I love to start with the first one, where the first theme is expanding access to care globally. It just happened to be that yesterday, a board member from Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, Ambassador Dr. Jan Arne Rotegan, was on our show. He's on the board of Gavi. He's at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Norway currently, as their global health ambassador. Talked a little bit about Gavi, but in this report, you talk about obviously the financial, uniqueness of how to fund something like this when we're talking about the Ebola and the dengue and sort of the neglected tropical diseases that they focus on. You bring up a theme of vaccine bonds, which has been very successful as a way to support the work, but also provide a rate of return. Take us into a little of your experience with the Gavi example, if you would, and the importance of this in expanding global care.
I think this is, again, just a really great example of impact first investing, where there was a clear need for vaccine equity as a result of the pandemic. Affluent countries like the United States have the ability to purchase vaccines to distribute them widely. That is because the United States, for example, has the resources to do so. So in recognizing, one, that there's just a core health equity component to ensure that everyone has access to these vaccines, and also recognizing that the success of a vaccine rollout campaign in one country is actually at some point going to directly affect the rest of the world. We are a global health community, as we all learned through this pandemic. And so the example of Gavi just demonstrates the fact that investors were willing to take concessions in order to drive towards that health equity outcome. And again, I think this is just one of very many examples where impact is front and center. The driving motivation for this is impact. And the finance mechanism is sort of the tool, if you think about it. The finance mechanism is not the driving reason that one is creating this, right? But rather, it is the impact. And I think it is really that thesis that we hope to drive home in the health piece, as well as in the impact first piece, is that Really, it's about the impact and the outcomes that you hope to achieve, and then figuring out what's the right finance structure to come behind that, and being creative and really agnostic to what that is, and letting the impact and the outcomes and the organizations and the companies that are doing this work help determine what's the right financial structure to achieve the impact goals that everyone together shares.
Another really important theme in this report that is kind of core to our show is aging, healthy longevity. There's a section in the report on using these impact investing mechanisms to support an aging population, and it was kind of interesting because one of the areas that you go into was sort of the technology, the smart home, the aging in place concepts, where yes, technology is great there, but it doesn't have to be the most expensive technology. One of the examples, and again, there's AARP mentioned in the report. Another guest we had on the show was Dr. Charlotte Ye from Chief Medical Officer at AARP Services, talking about how simple things like hearing aids have an amazing impact on sort of the rate of dementia development, which, as you know, billions and billions of dollars spent annually. Talk a little bit about some of what you're seeing in the healthy aging space. And a little bit, and there's another example you gave in the report of a group called PACE, I believe, was the funder in a program InnovAge. But take us a little into what you're seeing in the healthy longevity space, because this is kind of a critical one for us.
Yes, I do think PACE is a really good example to talk about. And it's a program that essentially allows elders to age in their homes. It provides community-based supports. It can actually transport individuals to a community center during the day, provide wraparound healthcare support, but also allow them to remain in their homes. And that is one of the big themes that we are hearing is aging in place. Allowing individuals to stay in their communities, maintain their social connections, maintain their independence, but actually providing the wraparound supports to do so in a meaningful way. That can take a couple of different forms. It can actually be independent living communities, which is, again, there's nonprofit as well as for-profit independent living communities. And then there's actually just providing home-based supports like PACE. So I would say that is one of the biggest themes that we're seeing is how do you support individuals to maintain the communities that have given them life and energy for all of these years and can continue to sustain and give them life and energy for many years to come. And I will say, PACE is a very US-centric model. And I also think in sort of other communities, there are different types of caregiver setups and places where nonprofits are really leaning in to provide caregiver support in different ways. So I do think both the aging in place and caregiver support as people's parents age, they often become the sole caregivers of those parents. So how do you support those individuals? The Alzheimer's Association, for example, does a lot of work around caregiver support. And then there's, again, other nonprofits like Nora Health in India that also provide caregiver support in different ways. So I would say aging in place and caregiver support are two big ones. And then I do think in terms of some of the physical and mental health, dementia, Alzheimer's are really big topics and issues. Alzheimer's treatment is evolving and changing. It's a very different landscape than it was 5 years ago. And that actually creates some really important health equity implications. So if Alzheimer's treatment becomes available, what does that mean? How is it covered by Medicare, for example? Does everyone have access at a low cost to that? Is everyone able to get to a regular treatment facility? So just the fact that the prevalence of these diseases is increasing and the treatments are increasing is wonderful and raises a whole new set of questions around what does health equity look like in an aging population.
And as we talk about aging and obviously the connections to global health and when you think about sort of the COVID pandemic, how it disproportionately affected the aging population, the theme of biologic resilience comes up, yet resilience is something that snakes its way through sort of all parts of the healthcare system, all parts of public health. And of course, the third important part of your report here is on mental health and wellness support. I think of mental resilience, a major area, because we're not talking about just the elderly, we're talking about the young, clearly, all the social isolation dynamics that we think about in the aging population. Young kids experienced them during the pandemic. You clearly, you outlined a couple different groups here, a group called What If Ventures, another organization, Shine, that was, you've advised in specifically focusing on this area. Talk a little bit about mental health, wellness, and resilience, if you would.
I would say just wearing, again, the sort of public health area of expertise, mental health overall and mental well-being is one of the biggest public health challenges facing the world today. I'm guessing folks have seen the CDC data that in particular talks about the impact of mental health and well-being on youth and teens at this point in time, and just the astonishing and terribly upsetting rates of suicide, ideation, of depression, of anxiety that is pervasive in our society today. And again, I'll take a little bit more of a US focused lens, as that's where I've spent more of my time recently thinking about mental health. But overall, mental health is just one of those places where, from an impact investing perspective, there are, exciting investments. From a philanthropy perspective, there are also really important opportunities to invest in organizations. And I would say for youth and young adults in particular, there's a number of organizations that are doing really great work. Active Minds is one, for example. JED is another, Born This Way Foundation, that are really focused on how do you take the existing interventions that we know work and deploy them at scale to reach the populations that need it most. And I will just pause there because, again, on this theme of health equity that we keep coming back to, there are huge health equity implications. BIPOC youth, LGBTQ plus youth, for example, have disproportionately high rates of challenges with mental health. They are experiencing mental health challenges at disproportionately high rates. And part of the work of these organizations is to say, and the Steve Fund is another great one that's doing some really focused work on BIPOC populations, but how do you actually take the interventions and get them to the populations that need them most in a way that is accessible to those populations, is meaningful to those populations? And so I think there's a real need from a mental health perspective at a population level, and again, a whole set of for-profit and nonprofit really exciting interventions, but also a really tailored and focused strategy that gets to those that are most marginalized and experiencing disproportionate outcomes.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have been focusing heavily so far on your public health programs, but as mentioned in the bio, you are the lead for the measurement, evaluation, and learning component of Bridgespan. And again, for the audience, Mariah published another sort of very important paper in the Harvard Business Review back in 2019 entitled "Calculating the Value of Impact Investing." And Mariah, here, you outlined a couple of different programs. One that had to do with called Alcohol EDU and deterring alcohol abuse among college students. There was another one on a program called Haven about dating, sexual violence, and then a financial literacy program. Talk about what comes into sort of the measurement, evaluation, learning, because obviously whether you're dealing with a philanthropy or a high net worth private office or a nonprofit, obviously they want to make sure these things are working per the impact. Take us into this part of your responsibilities. I think this is extremely important.
Sure. So at Bridgespan, we see measurement, evaluation, and learning as one of the core components of an organization's strategy. Organizations exist in the world, nonprofits exist in the world to have impact, and the way in which they know they are having impact is through engaging in measurement, evaluation, and learning activities. And it's a place of personal interest because I just have seen the value over time of an organization being able to take data, listen to its constituents, listen to the community, and actually say, we can do something different. We can actually improve this because we have this information. So we support organizations on MEL. We support nonprofit organizations in thinking through their theory of change and the outcomes framework that they will use and the indicators they will use to measure their impact. We support donor collaboratives, foundations, and philanthropy in understanding what are their impact theses. What do they want to invest against, and how will they know if they are being successful in reaching their own goals in deploying capital? And we support impact investors in thinking about what are the indicators that will let you know whether or not an investment is actually an impact investment? And then once you make an investment, how do you know that investment is having impact over time? So the impact multiple of money falls in that last category. It's a tool for impact investors specifically. The premise of the IMM is really a return on investment analysis, essentially a social return on investment analysis, where you are saying, for each dollar that I am investing in this company, what is the social benefit that I can expect to come from that investment? Also, what are the negative externalities that might be associated with that investment?
Mm-hmm.
So when you take into account the positive social benefits, take into account the negative externalities, and take into the account the amount that you are actually investing in this company, is the return great enough such that you believe this is a true impact investment and worth your time? So that article, well, worth your time and money, to be clear. So that article really lays out a methodology to say, if you would like to do this ROI approach to thinking about whether or not this investment could have impact, here's a really interesting way to think about that. Mm-hmm. Now, SROI is a tool that nonprofits use as well. Nonprofits may say, I want to understand that for each dollar that my organization spends on our program, what is the social benefit? There are short-term social benefits in many cases, and there are also long-term social benefits over time. So while the IMM is an impact investing tool specifically, there are ways to take this idea of SROI and apply it across our different segments. That said, SROI is one tool in a measurement toolkit, and there is a really there's an important other article that we published recently around centering equity and measurement. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that article builds on our core measurement IP. And I would say, if you were to sum up how Bridgespan thinks about measurement, it is at its core, it is a tool for learning and improvement. We believe that all measurement should be done in pursuit of continuous improvement and learning. Not just to count widgets, not just to satisfy donor requirements. So we understand that is sometimes a dynamic that organizations have to navigate, but ultimately, it is a tool so that you can look at your programs, find ways to make them better, and work with your communities and constituents to make sure that your program is in service of the outcomes that they care about. Mm-hmm. And so in that measuring for equity framework, it really talks about the importance of centering stakeholder voice from the beginning of the process. It talks about aligning the outcomes that your organization cares about with the outcomes that matter most to the communities and constituents. It talks about finding different ways to unpack the data and using both qualitative and quantitative measures to truly understand the impact of your program. And it talks about creating learning communities and discussion to understand what the implications are from that data. So I would say, at large, that measuring for equity framework is a framework that we believe, while the article is more focused on nonprofits, is something that nonprofits, impact investors, and philanthropists can benefit from as an overarching way to think about measurement.
Yeah, I was a very interesting article as well, and it's entitled "How Nonprofits Can Incorporate Equity into the Measurement, Evaluation, and Learning." And there's a really interesting case study in there as well about this sub-Saharan African NGO. I recommend that everybody listening and watching take a look at that one as well, because as Mariah was saying, there's a lot of critical learnings in there for that part of the process. Mariah, one other thing I just want to ask about that. One of the guests I had on a few months ago was Dr. Celia Conrad, who is the CEO of the what's called the Lever for Change program at the John D. Nathan T. MacArthur Foundation. And we were talking about sort of as in your bio where you talk about big bets. And there's big bets out there, but then there's some really big bets that may be too much for even sort of the deepest pocketed folks on this planet to handle, right? Always hear about, why doesn't Elon Musk put all his money into solving X, Y, or Z? In my old industry, the pharmaceutical industry, I point out, well, we spent Elon Musk net worth every year and had a hard time developing drugs for cancer and Alzheimer's and so forth. What happens in the case of sort of the really big moonshots? I mean, is there such a thing that you're exploring sort of collaborative impact investing when it comes to some of these sort of 11-figure type things? And I'll just get an example I love to give. I had Senator Joe Lieberman on the show talking about this Athena program for sort of biodefense, preventing the next COVIDs from happening. Now they need $100 billion. Not the smallest number, but we have to put money to work on these things. What are you seeing in sort of some of these areas where someone might want to do a big bet, but you said, wait a second, we need some other impact investors at the table with you? Any interesting stories on that front?
I think that collaboratives is the future of impact investing and philanthropy. I think that as you say, the social problems are too big for any one billionaire philanthropist investor, even when we're talking about billions of dollars in terms of fund size or net worth. It is too much for any one person to solve. We have seen a huge growth in the donor collaborative market. And we've seen a big growth in impact investing funds, which often pool capital from multiple investors, to be clear. There's multiple LPs and GPs that are investing in impact funds. Mm-hmm. That's not just one investor. And this idea that investors and philanthropists don't want to go at it alone and can actually take more risks as a part of a group, because it sort of takes away the social pressure that you're the first mover,
right? Yeah.
Is huge. And so these donor collaboratives and impact funds are able to tackle these problems by taking capital from multiple people who have a lot of capital, but not enough to solve the problem on their own, and do that to make change. I think there was one coming out of COP, the climate convening this year, for example, that was I forget the exact number. It might have been 500 million going towards electrification, for example, from a handful of foundations and donors. 500 million is a significant amount of money.
Sure.
And my guess is that when those organizations were putting together that joint investment, that they were able to nudge each other up a little bit, say, well, if we put in this much, will you put in this much? And then we can get to this big number, for example. So I truly believe donor collaboratives have the ability to unlock significant capital that is sitting on the sidelines. And it does take the pressure away from any one individual. The other thing I would say is that there is a huge need and opportunity for public-private partnership, for example. So governments putting in dollars and being able to leverage private capital, again, both in terms of impact investing structures and also more traditional philanthropic structures. And this idea of how do you just pool capital towards a common goal is something that I think is going to become more of the norm going forward. And I think Lever for Change is a great example of an organization that's been able to move significant capital, as you say, based on this approach. And I imagine that we will see more of these collaboratives really pushing the envelope in terms of what they can do in the coming years.
Excellent. No, it's nice to see that model is existing and being reproduced in sort of these different areas. So no, that's fascinating. Right. What else is coming up for 2023 per your portfolios. I don't know if I've watched you a bit on different interviews on the on YouTube, but are you getting out to any conferences, giving any talks, places that the public facing initiatives that we can see you, listen to you, meet you, possibly anything else for 2023 that you may want to mention per you and Bridgespan, please?
That's a great question. I would say a few things. One is that we are actually working on a measurement piece that is focused on donor collaboratives, as we just talked about. So how do we actually know those donor collaboratives are having impact over time? How do they have more impact over time? What does it mean to be a high impact donor collaborative? Again, these collaboratives are moving billions of dollars.
Right.
So what does it actually look like to learn as one of those collaboratives? So that's a piece that we are aiming to put out at some point this year. And then the other piece we're working on is how do you measure systems change, which is, everyone has their own definition of what systems change actually means, which is could be a whole other conversation that could take over an hour or longer. But once we agree on a common definition of systems change, how do you actually know you're driving towards those goals? Systems change often is big, lofty, long-term goals. But how do you know you're making progress at year 1? How do you know you're making progress at year 5? What does it actually mean to think about contribution versus attribution? That you don't actually have to say, as a systems change organization, the change in the world is directly attributable to your organization, but rather that you've meaningfully contributed to it. And that alone is actually enough to say that you are having impact. What does it mean to actually be an adaptive measuring organization where you can say, we actually celebrate failure because it means that we learned something and shifted course and therefore are doing something differently today? What does it mean to celebrate that as a part of a measurement process? I think overall, we're so focused on positive results, seeing green on the dashboard, feeling like we're always winning, and we have a really high success rate. But how do you actually norm failure in pursuit of some of these big lofty goals? That's something that just as a part of systems change measurement and as a part of measurement overall, I think is really critical because people aren't going to take risks or they aren't going to talk about taking risks if everyone is afraid of failure. So that's just sort of another theme that I think is cross-cutting in our measurement work right now. And then I would say from a public health perspective, going deep on what it means around health equity and where philanthropy and nonprofits can really play is important, and understanding that health equity means different things to different populations and in different contexts, and tying that to social determinants of health, especially in a US context, feels really critical. So those are a few of the things that we're working on right now. And typically when we put out a publication, we do a webinar on that publication. We may decide to speak at conferences. And are always happy to just have conversations with those. I mean, we at Bridgespan learn from organizations doing the work. We are essentially sponges, and we see themes and we see connections, and then we talk about them. And our goal is to shine a light on the organizations that are doing this work. So just, really want to encourage folks to say, if any of the topics that I talked about today strike a chord, you want to learn more about it, you're actually doing work in this area, you have a different point of view, that's great. That's how we learn. And so really having these discussions over time is how we get better on sharpening our point of view, and we learn as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, a fascinating set of programs. Again, for everybody that's listening or watching, check out, we will put all the links in the bio that Mariah has talked about. Mariah, I'm rooting you on. It's just a great, portfolio of projects and initiatives they have going on there that clearly has its place in the 2023 world, and really wishing you the best with all of it. Again, for everybody listening to this particular episode of the show across the various podcast networks or watching on the YouTube channel, you've been listening to Mariah Collins, partner, the Bridgespan Group, working with the major social chain leaders of the world to make this place more equitable and more just. Mariah, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us and educate us on these themes for a little while. Obviously, thank you for everything that you do there at Bridgespan. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow. tomorrow for so many people out there via what you do. Really great story.
Thank you. It was great to be here.